Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Landon.
I'm Kason.
And I'm the Lorerunner. I suppose I should tell you guys who the heck I am. I do really boring, long discussions about geek topics like movies and games and stuff like that. I do long plays where I stream for hours and hours and hours on end that I call lore runs, where I go through and try to discuss every little tiny detail of a game, its construction, the story narratives, the gameplay concepts, all that kind of stuff. And I have a whole series on YouTube, which I call my Ruminations, where I sit down and basically try to discuss the shows or games or whatever it is I'm going through, and just whatever I feel like it's worth talking about.
Yeah. If you guys have not seen the Lorerunner, either his YouTube channel or his Twitch channel, go and check it out. I was just talking about this before we got started with the podcast, but I actually, for almost a year straight, I watched the Lorerunner show, the Ruminations on the Star Trek Voyager series, while I would eat dinner, like every single night. I just found it really fascinating. He goes into extreme detail on everything that he analyzes, and it's a really cool show, so you guys should check it out. And he's going to be with us today talking about our topics for the day, which are, number one, last week we alluded to this a little bit, but Hajime Tabata basically teased that Final Fantasy 15 was going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch. We have a little bit of clarification on that. Maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but I can't remember. All the weeks blend for me these days. But it was on a Twitch stream, I believe it was, that he was basically saying it rhymes with Switch. He made it very. It rhymes with Twitch. Basically.
It literally is Switch.
Yeah, it was extremely obvious he was talking about the Switch. And so, anyways, he's clarified a little bit about what that means. So we're going to talk about that. Then we get into our viewer-suggested topics. We had a lot of good ones this week, some of them for our guest today. First one is from Zen Rix, asks, which games in the Xeno franchise have you played, and are you excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Next question comes from Roximus, asks, how does your need for a story affect your enjoyment of a game? For example, do you avoid games which have sparse or outright non-existent stories, even if the game itself really seems to capture you based on mechanics, difficulty, or just the novelty of the concepts? Fourth question comes from Zels Clemmers. I hope I'm saying that right. For Lorerunner, how do you decide what to accept as canon for a given story or a game? Good question. And then lastly, Chocolate Rob, kind of a two-parter to this, but the first part, for Lorerunner, why do you do Ruminations instead of something more concrete like reviews or more clinical analysis? And then broader for all of us, on a more general note for all of you, how difficult is it separating bad localization from a bad story? All right. So let me pull up this article here. Looked at it. It's on DualShockers. Looks like it was posted September 2nd, so a couple days ago. Okay, so we talked about how on that Twitch stream, Tabata was saying another platform this could be coming to rhymes with Twitch. He was making it very obvious. He was talking about the fact that Final Fantasy 15 is coming to the Nintendo Switch. And people were thinking they had recently also unveiled the mobile version of Final Fantasy 15 with the entirely different art style, but that seems to shot for shot almost be exactly the same game.
It is. After IGN put up the first 20 minutes of the game on the mobile version, and it is like, it's crazy. It is the same game. It is beat for beat the exact same thing. Right. Except there's a couple things where, like, when you leave the gas station, the screen does go black. There's a little bit of a loading screen. It appeared to be before you left to go into the open world part. But other than that, it was like exact. It was crazy.
Nice. So there's this article is referencing a clarification that he wanted to make about that version of the game. Basically, what it's saying here is that they had tested the Luminous engine on the Nintendo Switch, and they're not saying he tried to be really careful to say, like, it's not that the Switch isn't powerful enough or something like that. It's just that we didn't design the engine with the Switch in mind. So when we tried to load it in,
Luminous engine freaking sucks and
it is a garbage engine.
That's what he wanted to say. There's a reason no other game uses that engine.
And why Square themselves have moved to Unreal Engine 4
exactly.
for Final Fantasy VII Remake. And
in this article, they mentioned, but we did test Unreal and Unity, and we were very impressed with its performance on the Switch for those engines.
So
I don't know.
The fact that they were saying that they got Unreal Engine 4 and Unity running just fine, do you guys think that means that they're going to try and see if they can get the higher fidelity original version running through. I mean, I don't know what the workflow would be for that to get that going into a different engine and then to put it on the Switch. Or does this mean almost for sure that we're going to get the mobile version coming to the Nintendo Switch?
That mobile version could easily be running Unity or something like that.
True.
It could be if that was the case, it would be pretty easy.
Do we happen to know if they've already done this kind of engine supplanting thing to the mobile version? Because that would answer the question right there.
I don't know what engine the mobile one's running on.
I don't know. Like, what does Mobius use, right? Like, I have no idea.
God, I don't know. I should know that, but I don't know off the top of my head.
That's a really good question, actually. If Mobius is running on Unity or Unreal, actually, it would make a lot of sense if it was Unreal, because they had that that crossover with the Final Fantasy VII Remake stuff where they brought some of those models from the remake into it. And we know that Final Fantasy VII Remake is being done in Unreal Engine 4. It is possible.
Yeah. Is there a version of Unreal that works on mobile phones right now? I haven't looked into that.
I don't know.
Unreal Engine 4.
Let's hit Google really quick.
On mobile.
I just don't feel like I've ever launched a game. I don't play that many games on the phone, but I've never launched one and haven't been like Unreal.
There's a whole thing
some
here.
companies
I know some that use
Unity. Yeah,
Unity's real. So it is Unity.
Pokemon Go is Unity.
Yeah, Pokemon Go is Unity. Hearthstone is Unity.
Mm-hmm. You know, most of the high level phone games are running Unity. I would imagine when they say, "Oh, we tested Unity and it was great," I'd imagine that they're talking about the phone version of the game on the Switch, and they're like, "Sick, Switch can do this really well, guys."
I've actually had a theory, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
From because anybody who watches my show knows I tend to be a bit of an economic geek. From a business side of things, if you look at the feasibility of effectively doing a remake of a game that just came out, like we were talking about porting into another engine or something like that, you need to have something to provide backing for that. You need to justify that to the managers. And just selling that on a phone has never really struck me as something that's sufficient to justify that, unless they're going to port that version to other things. It might not even just be the Switch. There might be like a Vita version, for example.
Oh, I see.
Ooh, now we're talking. Yeah.
So then we can have a toaster. Got to have the toaster. No, that's Skyrim. Skyrim's coming out of the toaster. But you know what I mean, though, right? Like the idea that they're already putting all this work and effort into this. Why not push it as far as they can? And if it really is the Unreal or the Unity engine, it wouldn't be that hard to do an upscale version of it. Like if all the hard work is already done for the mobile version.
Yeah, that's true.
So just my thoughts.
I wonder. What they're doing.
Go ahead, go, Mike.
Sorry, sorry. The delay always kills us back and forth. So we know they're using Luminous for the PC version, right? That's the one that's coming to Steam. They're staying with Luminous for that.
Which sucks. But,
I guess it would really just come down to, like you're saying, Laura. I guess whether or not it's economically or financially feasible to justify the cost of getting the whole game running in Unreal just so that you could port it to the Switch. Really.
Or just to port it to the phones, or however they did it. And also the model that they're selling it on the phone appears to be one-time purchase. You get the whole game, right? Unless they do chapter by chapter. I don't know how
you get a first chapter for free.
Oh, that's free, but it's like the Mario Run.
Right, like Mario Run.
Right. And Mario Run, I don't know if you guys know, this is sort of news. It got pulled from the App Store. It's no longer there.
Only on
iOS,
and people believe it was a compliance issue because it's still on the Play Store.
So Google, you can still play it on Android, but not on.
You can
unless
still play
you downloaded it.
Yeah.
Well, you can't get it.
A lot of people say
that game on iPhone.
Right. I've been reading that it was probably a compliance issue. This happens sometimes. The game will just get pulled because Apple's like, "Hey, you got to change this." Yeah.
Even Nintendo can't escape those compliance issues.
But
anyways, point being, they're using a model that Nintendo tried and did not have great success on. Now, Square Enix, they're the masters of the lottery system and all the exploitation phone game stuff. Yeah, all the gotchas and lottery stuff. So, for them to not do that on this game is interesting. It's like
feels like a console experience.
Yeah, exactly. Which is part of why I'm drawn to it. I actually really want to play this version of the game because it doesn't have all that flashy stuff. But it could be that it's not going to be as profitable for them as it would have otherwise been. So of course that justifies them maybe putting that version over onto the Switch and the Vita and elsewhere.
Yeah.
Or the Vita 2. I mean, sorry, the PSP 2, which we're going to learn about in 2 weeks, by the way.
Ooh.
No, it's the PS5. They're not going to have any follow-up.
If they do the PS5,
all the way.
The Xbox 9 is finally coming out, and then the PS5 Pro.
there you go, yeah.
Oh, jeez. I really hope they don't announce a PS5 this year.
I hope they don't either. That would be terrible.
I know. It's too early. It's too early.
PS4
Give me a couple
Pro
more years.
2.
Hey, they got to beat Scorpio. Like Microsoft and Sony are just going to keep like one-upping each other into just the oblivion, well beyond where anyone cares to go.
And then they'll just start selling PCs. Sorry.
Exactly.
That's kind of what they're doing.
It's
Microsoft
basically what it
getting
is
into the
now,
PC
yeah.
market. That's expected. Sony, on the other hand, they're gonna have
that's
issues.
true. That's true.
They sold off Vio. Who'd they sell off Vio to? They're just going to replace it with PS something. The PS laptop.
The
PS computer.
Yeah.
PlayStation
PS,
laptop.
The Sony top. The Sony top.
Sony top. There you go.
Yeah, totally. Anyways, if anybody watching has any further information on this, let us know. It's starting to look like much more feasible that the Switch version of the game is going to be just the mobile version that's going to get ported over the Switch.
You know what's weird though, and I don't know if this had anything to do with it, because he was pretty sure it's coming to the Switch earlier, right? And now he's kind of walking back
Backpedaling a
a
little
little.
bit,
I don't know. I want to buy this version of the game.
Yeah.
Preferably, I want to buy the cartoony, awesome version of Final Fantasy 15 on the Switch.
Yeah. Oh,
I don't know if it's coming to the Switch. Now, that game comes out on my phone in a month or two, right? Just really soon.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I don't want to buy it 2 times. But
Yeah.
if it comes out on the phone, and companies do this all the time with like limited exclusives and all that kind of stuff.
Well, like
They don't want you to know what other options you have until after the first one shows up, so
Yeah.
that you buy that one.
Yeah.
And then if I want it for the Switch, well, then now I have to buy it twice. And I really would like to know if this version's coming to the Switch or not, so that I can wait for it. Otherwise, I'm totally buying it on my phone.
Well,
but they're not going to
because
tell me that.
the touchscreen controls, like this game seems like it would benefit from a physical analog stick.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
They're going to have an on-screen thing, but that can get kind of tiresome to use. And so, yeah, if you know there's a version that has physical controls you could use,
I'm buying that
I think
for
a lot of people would prefer that. However, like
Yeah.
the way mobile gaming goes in Japan and just people just eat up games on phones, I can see
Yeah.
people in Japan buying this on a phone and then buying it on a Switch still. Jeez.
I mean, I got to be honest.
So
I would probably buy it on the Switch and the PC if I had a choice. Switch for the obvious.
there
I
you
love
go.
the Switch. Absolutely love the Switch.
Yeah.
Because
PC
it's awesome.
because mod support.
Yeah, mod support.
Right. Well, and it's the highest
And yeah, it's going to be
version
the
of the
best.
game that you can get, right? The highest fidelity.
And I
It's
can
not
just
on
play it on my
PlayStation.
PS3 controller, and then I'm so.
There
Right.
you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Takes
Yeah,
a while.
so we'll keep our eye on that. Hopefully, they'll announce the Switch version before the mobile version comes out, so Kaysen doesn't have to buy it twice.
Please. God. He never listens to me.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic here from Zenrix. Good question here. What games in the Xeno franchise have you played, and are you excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Can you talk a bit more about your favorite Xeno games, the ones you still recommend going back to playing, and what you expect from Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Lorerunner, how many of the Xeno games have you played?
I have not played the Wii U one, and I can't even think of the name of it off the top of my head. It's like
Xenoblade Chronicles X?
That's the one. I have not played that one, but I have played every single other one. In the interest of total fairness, I have not finished Xenogears because I hit disc 2,
Ooh.
and
Yeah.
anybody who's played Xenogears knows what happens, and I just put the game away at that point.
Really?
I couldn't do it. I couldn't finish it, which is a shame because I have since gone back and seen the rest of the game. Anyway, so I played all of them except for the Wii U one.
Okay. Which one's your favorite?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that because that's a hard question. Honestly,
Mike, man, with the tough questions.
damn it, man, come on. Yeah, like you asked me my favorite Final Fantasy. I got that immediately, but
Right.
honestly, I think I'm gonna have to go. Can I count all 3 Xenosagas as one game?
Might as well. I've not played them, so.
I'm gonna count
you go.
all 3 Xenosagas as one game. While they do have
That's your favorite game.
ludicrously convoluted plot. Yes, that is my favorite game. Albel is an awesome character. They do some great stuff with. You know what? I literally can't talk about it without spoiling it. It just occurred to me. So I enjoyed that
Okay.
game where things happened.
Nice.
Good reason.
Great reason.
I have played all of them except for Xenosaga. So those three I have not played, but I've played Xenogears, I've played Xenoblade Chronicles, Xenoblade Chronicles X. So, it's... Well, I don't think Case and Landon, you guys have not played any of them, have you?
My experience with these games are limited to watching you play them, not doing them directly myself. From what I've seen, Xenogears would be my favorite.
Yeah.
But I have not actually played those games.
Back in the RPG Infinity days when we were active on those forums, I had a lot of people tell me that Xenogears was their favorite game of all time, and I needed to play it. And it was basically on my list to emulate after like Chrono Trigger and like the Tales of Fantasia and stuff like that. And I just never got to it. Mostly because I didn't really have a good PlayStation emulator at the time. And I was like taboo to talk about emulating, but that's freaking what I was doing. It was like 1999. Yeah. I don't know, or 2000.
That's how we played a lot of these games. I mean,
yeah, we were poor, man. We couldn't have all the systems. We just had N64. We couldn't play freaking Xenogears.
Yeah.
And especially when the Square Enix split happened, us and Mike had an N64. We didn't have the PlayStation, man.
Yeah, which was a freaking shame because my goodness, the freaking amazing RPGs that were on the and we knew it. We knew it.
Any of those games.
I know, but had it not been for us emulating a lot of games, we never would have played things like Seiken Densetsu 3 and games that didn't ever actually come to the United States. So,
Terranigma, excuse me.
Terranigma. Oh yeah, Terranigma is very, very good. Okay, so with that being said, in terms of like recommending ones for you to go back and play, like I said, I haven't played Xenosaga, but I have played Xenogears. I have a review for it on the channel, and I totally recommend playing it. Now, Lorerunner brings up a good point. The second disc is a hard sell for a lot of people. It is stark. It is stark how much control is taken away from you when you start disc 2. It's stark how rushed it is. There was an article recently with I think it was actually new info very, very recently, as of like E3, I think, where the director was talking about Xenoblade 2, but he was asked questions about Xenogears, and he basically said that like Square was wanting them to just end the game at disc 1, just end the game right there. And he was like, no, no way.
Not done. What are you talking about?
It's exactly. And he's like, the fans will be so mad. There's no way we can end it there. And so he basically pushed his team to just to complete the story. And that's why disc 2 is the way it is, because otherwise you wouldn't have even had a complete story. So
that would have been horrible.
I know. So knowing that, I mean, I'm grateful he pushed for that. I'm grateful he did everything he could to get the story finished. But you have to know that before going into playing the game, that overworld exploration and like traditional things you expect, everything you saw in the first disc is really not present for most of the second disc. And so that's going to throw a lot of people off. But for myself, and I think for many, many people, a lot of the people Landon was talking about, who he talked to on the forums, back in the day, the story is so deep, and there's so much going on there that a lot of people can look past it. And there's so much to think about and contemplate and really dive into, and so much material even outside of it. If you dive into the Perfect Works guidebook.
Is that whole thing translated in English?
It wasn't back then, but it is now.
The whole thing is?
Yeah, the whole thing is. I read it when I was doing my review on Xenogears, and it's I would say it's necessary. It's kind of like some of the Final Fantasy, what do they call them?
Ultimanias.
Ultimanias, yeah, where you got to have that to really like fully understand what's going on. I would say for Xenogears, it's even more necessary than any Final Fantasy game, but it is so rich that I think for a lot of people who value story in video games, they might be able to push past it. But you got to know ahead of time, like it's not it's very different when just two rules around.
If I could interject one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Me and my viewers were actually talking about the Xenogears series in Discord today or yesterday, I forget which. And just to give you an idea of the levels of complexity and the depth of this story, we're like, all right, I posited a question. Who's the main villain? And I got like 6 different responses.
Yep.
Because, I mean, it's that debatable. It's like, well, I mean, there's this person, but then they're doing this, but I mean, this person, but they're kind of a victim. So, I mean, maybe it's this one here. Yeah. I love that stuff. Love that stuff.
Yeah.
That might be suspiciously like real life, actually.
It kind of does. It kind of does. Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, you always want there to be one, you know, it's Donald Trump or whoever, you know, it's this one guy. And it's like,
it was Hitler. It was Hitler.
It's like, dude, there's
so much more
going
that was
on
30
than
other
one
people.
person.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's actually one of my favorite things about Xenogears is the villains are so good and they get so much screen time and they're so well developed. It might be, of all the games I've played personally, the one game that does that best, that develops its villains best. And for that reason alone, almost, I would suggest going back and playing that one. Not having played Xenosaga, Lorerunner, what would you recommend with those?
Okay, I know this is going to sound like a joke, but what I'm about to say, I say with total sincerity. If you go Google Xenosaga flowchart or Xenosaga whiteboard, you'll find some images that are flowcharts of the story of the Xenosaga trilogy. And if you look at that, you'll see this massive convoluted mess of incoherentness at first glance, but that is actually legitimately the story. All you need is context. So you look at it and say, oh, okay. I mentioned this because I have found, and this actually happened with a friend of mine I recommended to play the Xenosaga series. I was like, all right, I want you to go find this convoluted guide and just keep it up there on the other screen. He's like, why? Just trust me. And so he's playing through like, what? What's going on with Cosmos? I don't understand. He looks over the screen. Oh, wait, so she's connected to... Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. Oh, wait, but why is he doing that? Did he just crush his own head? What?
Now, do you recommend doing this on your first playthrough?
Yes, absolutely. This is not a game trilogy, whatever. This is not a series of games.
We're talking like Kingdom Hearts level.
I was saying, is there one of those?
Everything you're saying, just switch Xenogears out for Kingdom Hearts, and we're talking about the same thing.
No,
it is, but it is worse. Trust me, so much worse. But I would still legitimately recommend anybody out there who likes a really good JRPG, give it a shot. It like Xenogears, same general team. I don't actually know if it's the entire same team involved. A lot of higher concept stuff. They get really into Nietzschean philosophy as they're going through, and a lot of the whole thing
RPGs did around that time period.
Sorry, what?
That was a very many RPGs did around that time period. Very common theme in anime as well. Just very
anime,
anime,
very interesting. Very like Nietzschean.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of there's a lot to sink your teeth into. If you just want a good plot with good characters, it's there. If you want something to make you think, it's there. If you want something to engage you as an RPG, it's there. If you want something to have great characters that you really care about, it's there. So that's why I recommend Xenosaga personally.
Yeah. So pivoting from that, we get into the Xenoblade games, and this is what's important to understand about them, is that we're talking about all this deep philosophy and concepts and stuff they explored in Xenogears and Xenosaga. It's not as prevalent in Xenoblade, and that's because Monolith was purchased by Nintendo. So for all intents and purposes, it became a Nintendo publisher, or not publisher, but developer. And so when that happened, we don't have to go into detail. We understand Nintendo is what they are. So they have an audience, and they have a general... identity that they want to retain. And so Xenoblade and Xenoblade Chronicles X, while retaining a lot of really similar elements, like certain concepts that were from those games, they are much more basic in terms of story content, but still very highly polished. Still very, very good, especially Xenoblade Chronicles. Absolutely massive game, tons and tons to do. I think gameplay-wise, it's my favorite of the ones that I've played.
I agree with that, personally.
Yeah, but when you're talking about lore and like story content, maybe not so much storytelling, but story content, it's much shallower, but still good. So I would at least recommend you play Xenoblade Chronicles if you're looking forward to maybe trying out Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I'm not sure how much crossover they're going to have with their lore. It might even be a totally different
From what I understand, it's
world
basically
altogether.
none.
Yeah,
It's
so it
just-
might not have anything whatsoever. But
Wow.
so you don't have to. But I think at least for me, let's say with Xenoblade Chronicles X, without spoiling anything, there's something that happens at the end of the game where had I not played Xenogears before then, I would not have like known like what the full, how do I put it?
ramifications.
Like what, like it's because it doesn't go into it. It sort of rushes the end of Xenoblade Chronicles X, and having played Xenogears, understanding like what they were doing with that concept, it was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. I wonder where they're going to go with this. And then they leave me on a cliffhanger, and now we have no idea if they're going to do another story. It's Xenoblade Chronicles X's world, and they just moved over to Xenoblade 2. So, in any case, I like all of them that I've played. I'd say my favorite is Xenogears because of the depth of all of the stuff it's trying to explore. It's rough. It needed more time and development for sure to be complete experience, but it's really cool. So I absolutely recommend playing that one, and at least Xenoblade Chronicles not before, but just try those out and then try out Xenoblade 2. Anything else you guys want to add to that?
No.
I could add two little things if you want.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for
Well, first of all, isn't Xenoblade Chronicles available on the 3DS?
Yes.
it. Yes, it
But
is.
only
New
on the
3DS.
new 3DS.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Of course, the new hardware. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was just curious because that was just another method. Because playing a Wii game is getting more irritating.
That's
further
true.
we get.
I do think that you can download it on the Wii U eShop, at least for sure in Europe.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's available in North America. It might be. I'm not sure. But I know that they didn't do it initially when they made it available in Europe because it was coming out on 3DS and they wanted people to buy the 3DS version.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You have to look that up. But I think that at least in some territories you can get on the Wii U eShop if you have a Wii U. So, okay. Roximus has a question for us. All
He actually has a paragraph for us.
It happens a lot to us. We get paragraph questions on this channel. He says, how does your need for a story affect your enjoyment of a game? For example, do you avoid games which have sparse or outright non-existent stories, even if the game itself really seems to capture you based on mechanics, difficulty, or just the novelty of its concepts? Conversely, do you tend to excuse boring or terrible gameplay as long as the story is good? What if said story happens to be a masterpiece? Furthermore, should the lack of a story be a negative point in today's market, as the lack of fleshed out or well polished gameplay is? Who wants to start us off on this one? This is
I can start this one.
go for
No,
it.
because this one leans very much in like a Breath of the Wild versus Horizon Zero Dawn kind of direction, right? Where you've got on the one hand you've got like novel concepts and awesome mechanics and a relatively increased difficulty level, and then on the other hand you have like a really good story that still also incorporates some cool concepts and mechanics and stuff. But if it comes to just a duel between the gameplay of those two games, like I would expect Breath of the Wild to win out. But if you are talking about the story, then of course the Horizon Zero Dawn wins out. And like my opinion, you just have to like know, and Mike says this a lot, but you've got to know what the intention was for the people who made the game. Like, what were they trying to do? And sometimes that's important, sometimes it's not, but at least consider it. If the game ended up being something you didn't really like, before you write it off, go and find out what they were even attempting to do in the first place, because you may have totally missed. Like what we mentioned a few podcasts ago, me and Lana went and watched Dunkirk, and after the movie, the people in front of us were like, well, that movie sucked. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, if you came in expecting The Dark Knight and this narrative, superhero story, okay, yeah, sure, it's Christopher Nolan. You may have had reason to expect that, but okay, your expectations were betrayed, right? But he wasn't trying to do that. He was making, I feel like he succeeded very well at what he was trying to do, but you just can't compare it to, what he has done in the past or what other people in today's film marketplace are trying to do. So, having said that, this seems very much like Breath of the Wild versus Horizon Zero Dawn type of like perspective here.
So I feel like, because sometimes this seems to boil down to like figuring out what games to play versus what games to pass on. You can't play all the games out there,
Right.
and most people have a backlog so big, especially with Steam sales and stuff, that they could never actually finish it in the free time they have left in the next 50 years, right? And so, but you're still buying new games, so it's kind of
Right, you can't.
So it's tough. You've got to prioritize your time and see it's that marginal utility, right? You're talking about economics, Lorerunner, right? So, like, to me, the best way to determine this is through word of mouth from your friends, because they know you better than anybody else, and you can rely on that network of people that you know. And if you don't know people that are into games, like there's places like Lorerunner's community in Discord or our community in Discord.
Yeah.
Find like-minded people to you and see what they're talking about, what they've enjoyed. It'd be tougher to determine if you're going to be excited about a game that no one's played yet that comes out next year. But there's so many great games out there. And so, I mean, that's kind of like a sidetrack to kind of what he's talking about here. But I would just say word of mouth is probably the most reliable indicator of whether you as a person would like a game. Usually you have similar tastes to your friends or the people you spend time with. So I would focus on that. As far as, I don't know, like a game that has really crappy gameplay but a masterpiece story, I'm not really sure.
I don't know. I mean,
I'm not really sure what
LA Noire, or like not like crappy games, like action commands. Like,
I don't know.
It's hard to think of a good game with bad gameplay.
I don't know. I tend to I don't know. I tend to have publishers and developers that I like, that I follow. So obviously, I grew up playing a lot of Nintendo, so I tend to have a few Nintendo things that I'll reliably play. Outside of that, it's word of mouth for me whether I'll decide, and then your friend's gonna be able to say, this is what they were trying to do or what they weren't trying to do. So
I have one more thought as to the very last thing that Reximus mentions, saying, furthermore, should the lack of story be a negative point in today's market as the lack of fleshed out or well-polished gameplay is? And I would say no. Lack of story should not ever be considered a negative, because video games are not necessarily stories. They are games. And so, whereas the lack of fleshed out gameplay, it's a game. If you don't have good gameplay, your game is a bad game. But you can't discount a game for not having a story, because it's a game. So I feel like that kind of, that's my thoughts on the last part of the question there.
How about you, Lorerunner? What is your relationship with story versus gameplay?
Hang on. I've got my notes here. Let me just. Really quick. No, seriously though. I want to respond in one thing really quick. This is just a personal bit of advice for me. If you go like the word of mouth thing, I absolutely agree with that. If you go to someone and say, "Hey, should I get this game?" My opinion, if the person says yes or no, then either discount their opinion or ask for more. I'm sorry, it is just my opinion. You need more than just why? Why should I buy this game? Okay, well, okay, cool. Yeah, then I'm totally with it. Also, with regards to should the lack of story be a negative, I actually agree completely. I'm someone who fervently believes that there is no such thing as a game that cannot be improved by good story, an actual good story. We've seen this Injustice 2 that came out relatively recently, which actually has a surprisingly good story in a fighting game. We've seen this
which is rare. Actually, very, very rare.
Which is rare. It is legitimately rare. That's why I use that as an example.
That'll haul someone off a cliff and just drop them at any point.
But the point remaining, I feel like that really added to that game's value. I feel that was a positive. But I wouldn't give it a negative for having an absence. Now, with regards to what Reximus asked individually, does my need for a story affect my enjoyment of a game? Absolutely. But do I avoid games which have sparse or non-existent stories? I can name 2 examples right off the top of my head of games that are phenomenal games to play that have a total absence of story that I would still recommend. Those are a game I just recently finished playing like a couple of days ago on the Switch, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, which has an almost absence of story, but was really, really fun to play. Yeah. And by the way, highly recommend that for anybody out there.
Yep. Cool. Yep.
And another one is all of the Shovel Knights.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the Shovel Knights aren't exactly swimming in fantastic story. It's there,
Right.
but the gameplay of those games is, in my opinion, top notch and very, very high quality. While we're on the subject, Stardew Valley is another one that comes to mind immediately.
Oh,
It's a
right.
game that has really, really good gameplay. So it's easy
That's
to
when
look
you
at.
craft your own story, and that's
Yeah.
that's the attraction to Stardew Valley for me.
I agree completely. But on the inverse, will I excuse boring gameplay as long as the story is good? I used to do that more than I do now. I think it's because I'm older and I don't have as much free time. But there's a lot of games which I have slogged through to enjoy their story. And I know I'm going to get some hate for this, but it is still my honest opinion. Final Fantasy Tactics on the PS1 is a game that I just slogged through like 3 or 4 times on the PS1 version. I loved that story. I ate it up. But playing the game was just, oh, okay, hang on. So I want this, and no, I don't want to move.
You got all the hacks, man.
Yeah. God, what the PSP version's better, but still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my point on that. And what was his final point? As long as, what if the story happens to be a masterpiece? I've already addressed that. Final Fantasy Tactics. What more do you want from me? As the lore runner, people have accused me of this for years. People look at me like, all you care about is story. No, I do want the video games, in my opinion, are the perfect method of marrying activity and story. I mean, as you were pointing out, they don't have to have a story, and I agree with that statement, but it is the perfect avenue to have a fully interactive tale. And I think we need to, I wish more developers would focus solely on the idea of having a good game with a good story rather than a good game or a good story.
Yeah. Very good thoughts. I agree with basically everything you guys are saying. Anyone who's listened to our podcast in recent, weeks, we've talked about my feelings about gameplay and story, how I feel like they're absolutely equally important, and that they shouldn't be considered separate either by people playing or by the developers. They should be developing a story and a set of gameplay mechanics that go together, where you can tell the story through the gameplay. That's what I really like to see. But if we're talking about, as you're saying, if the gameplay side is really, really bad, can you still get through it if it's a really good story? I'm trying to think of an example, because I didn't dislike the mechanics of Tactics as much as you did. I don't think that they're the best. I think that they're quite broken if you know what to do, and if you don't know what to do, you can be very, very lost, and it can be very, very, very difficult. But so it's something where it doesn't communicate very well to the player, like what you can do. And anyways, I won't get into a Tactics discussion, but
I actually do agree with you on this. It's just,
yeah,
that's why I mentioned that the PSP version is so much better, because they convey so much more. And it's like, I'm supposed to do this.
I actually agree. I think on all fronts, the PSP version is a major improvement of the original, both in story and in except for one. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked.
Except for the church scene. Except
for that scene. Okay, so. What games have I played? I'll have to come back to that maybe. A game that I played that had absolutely atrocious gameplay, but I got through it because of the story, because I can't think of one.
Can I toss up an example?
Sure.
And I know I'm probably going to get some flack for this as well, but I've already said this, so Pillars of Eternity.
Pillars of Eternity. I didn't play it.
Hey.
I didn't play it.
Interesting.
Now, let me clarify that, because I don't think the gameplay was bad. I just think it was badly done. I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Well, let me give you like my biggest grief with it right here. Almost every battle, especially on a proper difficulty, is like, okay, I need to do this, and I need to move here, and I need to have this in this exact thing, and I've only got 5 of these, and I got 18 mana, and I go, okay, maybe I should go over there. Maybe I should have him. No, okay. Every battle is like that, and then there's tons and tons and tons and tons of trash, just littering every map, and they don't really reward you anything. You don't get experience from fighting enemies. And
that's weird.
So it's a slog in addition to being something that's not rewarding. So it, like, if you pulled that back, I think it could be enjoyable gameplay. But that was definitely a game I just kind of dragged myself through, because I loved the story, because it was a fantastic story.
Nice. That's one I've been wanting to get into, but I haven't had a chance.
Let me spoil everything for you. So it turns out
I will say I agree with Kate, what Kaysen said about video games do not need to have a story, and it should not be like, we're talking about like platformers, say like any Mario game like not having a story is totally fine because the game's absolutely fun to play.
Mario
Mario
Kart.
plus Rabbids, like
Mario
you said,
Kart,
Mario
yeah.
Kart doesn't
Yeah.
need to have a story at all. There are some games that are completely, it's just a game, it's a fun game to play. I've played many games like that. I do tend to look for stories in the games that I play. That's the kind of experience I like. So my need for a story definitely affects how I enjoy games. Like I play Mario Kart. I don't consider Mario Kart anywhere near my top 10. All of my top 10 games are for the most part story-driven experiences. So that definitely affects how I enjoy games. But to be honest, I don't think I have anything more to add to what Lorerunner said. I agree with what you guys said. I can't think of an example of a really good
Hold
story.
It is hard to think of a good example because gameplay is that important. You know?
It is that important, and I like you're saying. You know, I don't think I've ever picked up a game where like I didn't know ahead of time what to expect. Like I didn't hear from word of mouth, like you guys were talking about earlier. Like I didn't hear from friends, like, "Oh, this game's really good. You got to try it." It's like I just don't. I guess I don't shop for games that way. It's like I have a pretty good idea beforehand what I'm going to get myself into. So I've never really played a game where it's like, this gameplay sucks. I hate every second of playing this, but dang, that story's good. I got to get through that. I don't think I've ever had that experience.
What's wild? I was thinking of an example of a game that has bad gameplay. I know of a good game, several good games that have bad gameplay and a bad story.
Oh, really?
They're the Nancy Drew
best of all
games.
worlds.
The Nancy Drew games
Drew.
from the 90s. But they have good characters and interesting, like, good puzzles, right?
Oh, I see.
But the story sucks and the gameplay sucks because it's point and click 90s. You don't know what's clickable or not, you know?
You hover till your mouse changes.
Exactly. Well, not even. That was an innovation later.
yeah.
This one, you literally
this is
just
pixel
every
hunting.
click. Yeah.
You know what?
You play bad story, awesome game.
I did just think of something. One of my favorite games when I was a kid was Star Wars Rebel Assault 2. And I would say that game has really bad gameplay, especially by today's standards. It's super basic, and a lot of it's very unfair. Like I think, I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast. There's a couple of levels where you're supposed to be navigating through like really tight spaces. You're flying a ship or a speeder bike through the woods or something like that.
Oh,
you're
and
trying not to crash.
Right?
They designed drift into the freaking game, so you had to fight the drift at the same time as trying to turn. Anyways, it was freaking horrible gameplay. But they actually shot, with like live actors and everything like that, like a story that felt very consistent with like the original Star Wars trilogy, which I loved at the time, especially. And so like I loved playing the game because I loved watching those little scenes, and I loved the music, which was obviously straight from the Star Wars movies. And I just was fascinated by that side of it. And then it would get to the level, and it's like, oh my god, like trying to get through this, trying to beat it, just so I could get to the next cutscene. So there is one example where I actually did that, and I beat that game even though I hated a lot of the levels.
That's a good point, because sometimes the context for a game can make up a little bit for what's not actually a good game. And I'm not going to say any Final Fantasy game specifically. However, there are people that will still play a Final Fantasy game because of the context of the series, right? And Star Wars games, there's people that will. There are a lot of bad Star Wars games. There are people that will still play them because of the context of Star Wars.
Like you're saying,
context can really help, which is why in the 90s into the 2000s, people were all, EA made a living off of just doing the turnaround movie franchise titles and that sort of thing. It was huge because then you didn't have to make a very good game, and you could rely on the context of the franchise and what people already understand, and still sell it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Like, look at how many people complain about Final Fantasy all the time, but still will buy every single Final Fantasy game that comes out. You know what I mean? Like
many millions, actually.
15 sold really well. Yeah,
13 sold well.
13 sold. Yep.
Like those games meant so much to us back in the day for the older fans who aren't a fan of the new ones. I'm not saying Lorerunner is, or that I'm not, or whatever. I'm just saying for people who hate the new games that love the older ones.
I mean, what would it take for a new mainline Star Wars entry to bomb at the box office? It would take a lot of bad Star Wars movies.
News, everyone. Episode 9, Colin Trevorrow got taken
I heard about that.
Oh, I heard that.
Of episode
I heard
9.
that too.
What the freak is going on? Why?
Disney is force gripping.
Holy
the-
crap!
I don't know.
Every director is
don't
like
know.
failing on all of these movies.
Yeah.
I guess episode 8's still happening, but jeez,
It's
they're trying to apply
really
the Marvel equation, right? And it's not freaking working. Marvel does not have this turnaround with directors. People get in, they stay, they become huge names, they make awesome movies, and then they move on to something else. With Star Wars, that is not happening, and they're screwing up something. I don't know what it is. But these directors are not wanting to make these Star Wars movies.
If I may, just really quickly, there's a woman who's, I'm not going to say her damn name.
Kathleen Kennedy.
Kathleen
freaking Kennedy.
I legitimately think she is the Rick Berman of Star Wars right now. I legitimately think she is doing the same damn thing that Rick Berman did to Star Trek. Or rather, you know what I mean? She is doing what he did to Star Trek.
Is she going to make Rey wear a corset? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, God, I hope. Please.
Is that what you're saying?
I can't remember what we were talking about. Sorry.
We were talking
Story and
about context,
franchise games that are just
franchise games, like shovelware.
Oh yeah, Star Wars.
Anyways. I think we've sufficiently hit that topic.
If a Star Wars movie came out that bombed at the box office, that was it.
Yeah.
Which will never happen. Ever.
No, probably not ever.
No. Episode 1.
Good. I don't know.
It would take what's happening now. Yeah. Even after episode 1 and 2, episode 3 just I don't know, it's squared up.
Yep.
Made a lot of money.
It's a Star Wars movie.
That's all it takes. Okay, moving on to the next topic. We got Zell's Clemmers. This is a topic for Lorerunner. How do you decide what to accept as canon for a given story or game? I have a question for you regarding this as well once you've had your...
Well, first, I try to channel Mr. Miyamoto-san, and I just punch the story right out that I don't like.
We don't need that story.
No, all joking aside, this is actually really easy for me. Except that's actually the exact opposite. It's actually very, very complicated. I'm going to use Star Wars as the example. We're just talking about Star Wars, right?
Perfect.
The EU, the extended works that consider all of the things that were part of the Star Wars universe before Disney did that. How much of that, like how many of us, legitimately, and I've asked this before, how many of us actually looked at the whole breadth of the EU and said, yep, all of that is canon?
Well, I did when I was a kid. I did when I was 10.
Exactly.
Yeah, but not in any real way when I grew up.
Just about all of us cherry pick it, right? We all look at the things like, well, okay, that's canon because that's good. That's canon because that's contiguous. There are a few stories. So for me, it's mostly about those two things that I just mentioned. It's how strong the continuity is. Like if something just blatantly contradicts the rest of the established canon of a work, then I just look at it like, and if something decides to be terrible, let's use Crystal Star as the obvious example here. The book Crystal Star. Have any of you read that book?
I have not. No.
Don't. It is without joking, without hyperbole. It is a really terrible book, and it happens to be in Star Wars. And so, that kind of a work, it's easy to look at that and say no. But then you look at something like, let me use Kevin J. Anderson. Let me pick on her for a bit, or him. I'm actually not sure. Is that him or her? I've never found that out. Sure. Kevin J. Anderson, the author of Some Gender, is someone who's worked on several things. The Children of the Jedi series. I keep saying she. They've done. There's another work they did called Darksaber. Now, Darksaber is not a good book, but it is extremely contiguous, and in fact, actually advances the overarching story arc of the New Republic versus the remnants of the Empire, and moves several characters forward. So I look at that and say, okay, that should qualify as headcanon, as something that belongs, because it bothered to try. It may not be high quality, but it still fits neatly into the puzzle. That's my opinion on that.
That's very interesting.
Did you guys land in a case and have something to say about that?
I've got a little something just from going into things like Kingdom Hearts, or maybe 15 years ago, the Lord of the Rings and all of that kind of stuff, delving into stories that have really deep lore. It does get kind of confusing, and I know within the Lord of the Rings, or the Tolkien community, I guess, there's like tiers of valid like sources, right? And basically,
Tolkien's letters,
right? His letters, things that
Tolkien's
he
edited
personally wrote. It has to be from the pen of Tolkien, even if it's his son Christopher Tolkien, who knew Tolkien better than anyone, and who, if anyone was going to compile his works and author them into, additional volumes, it would be him. However, he is not Tolkien.
He's a secondary source.
He's a secondary source. Yeah, a lot of these things he heard Tolkien say 50 years ago, and he's just now writing it into a book. Like, okay, I don't know if this is really what Tolkien wanted. Now, most people, myself included, will look at books like Children of Hurin, The Fall of Gondolin, this new Beren and Luthien that just came out, and we'll look at that, and the Silmarillion even, and say, okay, I'm accepting this. Like, this is...
Because you want more. You want stuff to read.
Exactly. Tolkien's gone, man. I'm not getting any more otherwise. But I understand the critique of, like, Christopher Tolkien is adding, 70, 80% of this book. 70 to 80% is what Christopher is writing, not John Ronald Rule Tolkien. I know his full name. Anyway. And so,
did you hear that from him, though? Did you hear that from him?
I don't know. It's not I don't know. Anyways, it's really difficult to get into, especially when you're trying to have discussions with people, because all of a sudden the Silmarillion is thrown out. It's like, oh, we can't accept that. And I'm thinking, I've read that book like 8 times. I did not waste my time getting to know all the events of the Tolkien universe.
I studied this.
To be discarded and say, "Oh, that never happened." And I'm like, "Dang it! Yes, it did. Yeah, okay, it didn't happen, but in our, in our little fake world, yes, it did happen. Come on!" But because I don't know Tolkien's letters as well, but other people have just torn through all this stuff. And so there's like tiers of what is considered canon or not. And the highest tier is always going to be what was specifically written by the author.
And that's the same as the discipline of history, right? Primary sources are really all you should be paying attention to with history. But sometimes, especially like Chinese history, I've been reading a bunch on that. And, crap's written literally 1,000 years after it happened sometimes. It's like, well, we don't have anything else. So we're still going to put this in here.
We're going to assume that
Probably not true, but we don't have anything else.
I have one more thing to add, though, because this is where it gets really complicated, because the same principle does not apply to everything. And this is where Kingdom Hearts comes in. Tetsuya Nomura, having made 7 or plus games, right? 15. If you include all the phones, anyways, like 1 million games. And so he has said things. Ow! Shoot! I stubbed my toe. Okay, he has said things online that the fans have come back to and corrected him on, and said, "Oh, Nomura, that's not what happened." In fact, it's commonly understood. Like, he's referred to certain forms as drive forms when it should have been. I can't. Anyways, so he'll do certain things like that. But even within the 3DS, Birth by no. Okay, so the image, the post credits scene that you see for. God, this would be so much better if I could remember the game, and I can't right now. It might be aimed at this. I apologize.
What image?
Someone will know, and put it in the comments, because you know what I'm talking about, and you know I'm right. So, anyways,
Max time, where are you at?
So the very end of Birth by Sleep, Xehanort causes these pillars to rise and reshapes the land. Okay, I know what it is now. It's the movie that was on 2.8. The what's it called? Oh, the movie about the phone game. Yeah. Passage. Well, it's not Fragmentary Passage. That's the game. The movie. The 2-hour-long thing based on Unchained, right? I can't remember what it's called.
What you're talking about. Like back cover or something like that.
So back cover, yeah. So I believe it's that one at least. But at the very end of that one, it shows the Master of Masters, or no, I think it's Luxu, not the Master of Masters. It shows the Luxu, who's the Master's apprentice or something, and he's looking out on the field of battle of Birth by Sleep. But this is supposed to be well before Birth by Sleep ever happened. But those pillars are there that we watched Xehanort make in Birth by Sleep. Why that should not be there. And it is widely accepted by the Kingdom Hearts community that, well, Nomura effed up, right? He screwed up. He made a mistake. Those pillars should not be there. But they are there, and Nomura put them there, and he directed this whole thing, and they're there. So it's a primary source that the fans have decided made a mistake, and they are not considering the primary source. And they, as the fans, are the what would you call it? The authority.
Yeah.
Now they even supersede
like the
Tetsuya
hive
Nomura.
mind authority.
Yeah, even above the author. And I think that's crazy. But this is Kingdom Hearts, and I know we're talking and laughing. It's a weird thing to happen to your own works, but Tetsuya Nomura's got a lot going on. I don't mean to disparage him. This happens to a lot of people. This is not just Kingdom Hearts. This happens, like, even going like George Lucas, I'm sure, contradicted himself many times.
Oh no.
Tolkien brought Tom Bombadil in. Tolkien had to rewrite The Hobbit just so that it fit in with Lord of the Rings after it came out 20 years later.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, he kind of changed things up.
Thing.
Yeah, it was not so. Even when I'm sorry, I'm taking way too much time. This was your question, Laura.
Oh, this is fascinating.
But I feel like this is an interesting anecdote that even in the case of the primary source author, you will have contradictions, and you still do not know for sure what is and is not canon. Anyway, that's my.
No, I actually agree
that's
with
what
you
I'm
completely. It's actually a whole other topic, which I'm not going to diverge into, of author fallibility, which is just this whole other mess over there. But if I could just add in another anecdote on top of yours, this happens rather commonly. There was a gentleman at a BlizzCon. I imagine anybody out there who knows anything about World of Warcraft knows exactly what I'm about to talk about. There's this kid who gets up, brave kid, got some balls on him. He stands up there in front of the thing.
I think I saw this video on YouTube.
And he's talking to the lore thing. And he says, "I'm sorry, this guy is here, but he should actually be here and dead." And the lore person said, "You're right." And so they added an NPC into World of Warcraft, into Ironforge. Just it was the fact checker or something like that, modeled after the kid, just to honor him for that. But yeah, we're absolutely right. Everyone makes that mistake. We like to believe that there's this infallible encyclopedic knowledge by creators, but creators are just people like the rest of us, and that exactly that author fallibility. So just this happens all the time. And in fact, last anecdote, I swear, last anecdote. Back when there was a committee whose entire job was establishing the EU continuity back with Star Wars, they had their own tier system, exactly like you're describing with the Tolkien stuff. That anything by George Lucas is right at the top, and then anything by the people George Lucas has personally written for, which is only like 3 people, if I'm remembering correctly.
Okay,
and then like everything that was done by the people who were authorized by the actual company of LucasArts, and then everything that was done. Exactly. It was just this tiered system. But what's funny is if you look at that system, and if you're a total geek like me, the stuff at the top is the most contradictory stuff in that list.
Yeah,
it's true. It's true.
But I digress.
Because at least when you have the group, as in with Nomura with Kingdom Hearts, at least when you have a group of people, they can bounce ideas off and figure things out, kind of like you said, like as a hive mind, right? They can kind of come to a consensus as thousands of people instead of just one person trying to balance it all in their head. There's way more fallibility there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll just add, because I think you guys have all touched on very fascinating topics. I wouldn't even have thought about a lot of this stuff. So awesome stuff. But I'll just say, like, I'm kind of weird because, like, there's some lore that I get, like, so into, and Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion is one of those, where I just, like, cannot get enough of it. I've read it, like, I think I've read the Silmarillion 7 times.
And it is not a wasted read. I'm telling you.
I find something new.
Read it.
I find something new every single time I read it, right? Yeah. But there are other games, and that maybe this touches a bit about what we were talking about in the last topic, actually, like Dark Souls, that have very rich lore that I just don't care at all about. It's not that I don't. It's not that it's not good. It's not that it's not extremely interesting, because it is. I just don't want to work that hard to figure it out. I love the gameplay, and so that kind of, again, touches a little bit on our last topic. I play those games for gameplay reasons only, and the story is excellent. I'm not saying it's bad. It isn't. It's awesome, and the lore is fantastic, and I love the style of it. It perfectly fitted for me, but the fact that it tells the story the way it does leads me to beat the game, move on, rather than dive into that very rich lore. I don't know why. To this day, it confounds even me. I have no idea why I don't get into it. However, I'll add an additional personal tier to the top of all the ones you guys listed. It's just myself. What do I think is really cool? Like,
or what did you take out of it, right?
Right.
What is your interpretation?
Like, I think if we're going to establish what is canon for, like, a community, everything you guys are saying, absolutely true. Like, I can't just come in there and be like, no, I liked this part, and I cherry-picked, kind of like you guys were saying. But just for me, like, we're talking about Tolkien. I like Christopher Tolkien as an author a lot more than J.R.R. Tolkien as an author.
I do too.
As in terms of writing style, in terms of pacing, in terms of like how he describes things, I have enjoyed the Christopher Tolkien publications of Middle Earth profoundly more than the originals. That's not to say I don't like the originals. I love them. I love them. And I think but I think they're so much better when taken in context of what Christopher Tolkien has given us. They're so much deeper and they're so much more rich, and I get so much more from them because of the context that those works give. So for me, it's like, yeah, the primary source is J.R.R. Tolkien, but there's a lot of stuff he wrote that I'm just not particularly fond of when I read Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or something like that. And there are other things that are in, say, The Children of Hurin that just really hit me hard. Like I felt so many emotions reading that that I don't know if I would have had the same exact reaction if J.R.R. Tolkien had written that book. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well,
so,
yeah, I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien
like
created a genre
yeah.
with the Lord of the Rings, essentially, like this high fantasy type. So, like, he, in some ways, he's almost like the King James English of, you know what I mean? He's the guy that people cite and then built off of as a foundation, even his son, right? So there's definitely, I think you're more likely to enjoy the writing style of an author that was born closer to the date that you were born. Than otherwise. That's not always the case, but sometimes you need to have been immersed in the way people wrote books at that point in time, right? And it's funny because Lord of the Rings is not compared to Shakespeare and crap that's actually long enough ago that you need to know some cultural context or how the language evolved. Yeah. But he rooted himself so deeply in that crap, like himself, that he dug some old stuff up and just insisted on bringing it with him. That was kind of weighty and really bogs down the pacing. And so I think one of the reasons you might like Chris Tolkien better is I think he's much better pacing wise. He's more author or reader conscious, where Tolkien's like, I don't know. He doesn't care. He'll do pages and pages and pages of a poem out of context. Lorerunner, you're going to say something.
I have to point this out, and I mean absolutely no offense, but Tolkien is not an author.
He's never a historian.
Was. He is a historian who is a linguist. Now, he has built an amazing world, and he has built a fantastic foundation. But I have actually reread the Lord of the Rings trilogy semi-recently, about a year and a half ago at this point, and it was it was like gnawing my way through giant reams of paper. Like, I legitimately had to go through and read, and then pause, and then reconnoiter what just happened in the books, and be like, "Oh, it's awesome." And then go back to reading.
That's true. And as a kid, I was like 14.
No offense to him. He loves his work. It's just...
Well, he would probably take that as a compliment, what you just said, how you'll read his works and you have to stop and process it for a while.
Yeah.
And realize the subtlety and the genius of what you just read. I believe he would take that as a compliment.
I hope so.
Even though most authors today avoid that.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. In any case, I think there was something else I add to that. I kind of forgot it now, but yeah, I think that, like, just for me personally, like, in terms of when we're talking about like Tolkien lore and stuff like that, like what I decide to accept as canon is just the parts that I find the most fascinating. The parts that I find the most fascinating are mostly in the Silmarillion and mostly in the Children of Hurin, and those books are not primary sources. And so, like, I eat those up. I'll read them again and again. And they're my favorite parts of it, and they're not even from the original guy. So,
okay, as a thought exercise, what if George Lucas was dead and he had a son who was continuing Star Wars? I think there's some legitimacy that Chris Tolkien gets being descended from J.R.R. Tolkien, even though that, I mean, having heard bedtime stories his whole life from his father is obviously going to paint his abilities as a creative author, I think. But I think there's some legitimacy that Chris Tolkien gets that would be hard fought if it was anyone, even who was just a friend who knew him his whole life, right? If C.S. Lewis was
started writing,
it's like I knew him the whole time, and he told me all this crap that nobody had ever.
He was in the book club, man. He heard
all
the
book club.
He was there. He helped take his notes and everything.
Yeah, so it's a total tangent, but I think Chris Tolkien gets a little more. I think his genealogy gives him some credibility.
More credibility.
And it's
That's
weird that
definitely
you
true.
say that because Star Trek went through almost exactly what you're describing, the lack of genealogy thing. I mean, Roddenberry passed on, right? And then other people who were involved in working on Star Trek who had no connection to him, who weren't his children or his brothers or anything like that, tried to carry Star Trek forward, post Star Trek 6 and into TNG season 3 and onwards and leading into Deep Space Nine. And I don't know if you guys were Star Trek geeks at the time when all of this was actually happening, but there was a lot of pushback against that because Roddenberry was gone and Majel Barrett had pretty much specifically said, no, I'm not dealing with this. I'm hands off on this one. You guys handle the actual franchise. And so there was a lot of, oh God, I mean, are we even going to keep doing the show? I mean, is there any purpose? And then of course TNG season 4 came out and Star Trek 6 was a smash success. And so people were like, well, okay, we'll try to keep going on with the series. We'll see what happens. And then Deep Space Nine happened. But my point being, I feel like Star Trek could have just plunked as a result of exactly what you're talking about, because there was no Roddenberry to carry on the legacy.
Right.
And Chris Roddenberry.
I think the smartest thing, I think the smartest thing that Star Trek did as a franchise was the most recent movie series with J.J. Abrams, because they created an alternate timeline that they could do whatever they wanted with. Yeah. They weren't tampering with the original story anymore. They weren't continuing it. They weren't retelling it. They split the timeline. They created what would you call it? An extra dimension, an alternate reality, and they can author that however they want to. And fans still maybe weren't super happy about it, but at least there's like a basis there that makes sense within the story, as opposed to kind of what Star Wars is doing, where it's like, hey, George is gone. We have enough money, so we bought the rights to continue to write Star Wars. And that doesn't work for me as a fan.
And you're getting random people. I mean, okay, Kathleen Kennedy and her clan, I guess, have supposedly the Grandmaster plans. Supposedly, supposedly.
Why these directors keep quitting? They're like, "Oh, this is already written down. Like, what are we even doing?" Who knows? I guess stuff to do.
No, this actually, we've talked about this before, but I don't care how much George Lucas screwed up the prequels. I want to know what his next 3 movies were. I really
don't care what Kathleen Kennedy thinks happened next. I want to know what George Lucas thinks happened next.
Yeah, I'm more curious about that than they brought this guy who did a great job. He who wrote the screenplay for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, right? For who's going to be working on the episode 9 script now, and it's like, I don't care what that guy thinks episode 9 should have been, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. As much as it probably wouldn't have been great for the franchise, it might have just kept on a downward trajectory. I will always want to know more than anything what George Lucas really would have done in those next 3.
I don't suppose you've ever
talking about alternate realities.
I don't suppose you ever read his old documents where he was talking about his original plan for the 9 movies, which happened right about when Empire Strikes Back was being finished up. The whole thing, Leia was, not even Leia, the sister was going to be a completely new character who was going to be introduced in episode 7, all that stuff. Have you read any of that stuff?
I haven't.
I've heard people allude to things, but I never read any of it. No.
That's a funny thing. Even George Lucas kind of changed his own story.
It's like, I need to do this, but wait, hang on. And it's funny because Lucas people like to crap on Lucas all the time, but Lucas actually had quite a few good ideas, especially since he's like, okay, I'm going to do this whole new arc with the sister, and it's going to lead to this thing, and Darth Vader's going to die. Well, wait, hang on. I can't introduce a brand new main character in episode 7. Okay.
But he did it for episode 4.
he did do that for episode 4. It's just
then he started on episode 4, so he got away with it.
Well, that wasn't the intention, though. Like you were just saying, it was never intended. He likes to pretend this. Everything in the world proves that Star Wars: A New Hope was supposed to be Star Wars, the one and only movie, the end. And then it became successful. And then he went back like, okay, well, let's hang on with that.
Yeah, now we got to make everything fit.
We got to stress. Oh God, what was I even thinking when I did that? I don't even remember. God, it was like late at night. I was tired.
That's funny. But at least, even if he did reformulate things as he went along, at least it was him doing it. Like he has that creative authority to do that to his own work.
I suppose it boils down to how much you care as a person about the creative authority of the person who was the genesis of a series versus someone who might be a better caretaker for the series at this point in time, and they're two different things, I think.
Yeah.
You know, this might become a relevant topic again when the Final Fantasy VII remake comes out, because Nomura has said that Nomura has said that they are not taking into account the extended material. Like they're not going to try and they're not gonna like adhere to that with telling this story. They're okay with throwing that stuff out the window. So we'll have to have Lorerunner on again to discuss this when Final Fantasy VII remake comes out.
Lorerunner, that means you're never going to be on the podcast again.
It's never coming out again.
It's like Half-Life 3. I'll be here for the Half-Life 3 episode, guys.
Yeah,
there you go. It's just for you.
Okay. Last couple questions here from Chocolate Rob. He wants to know why you do ruminations instead of something more concrete like reviews or more clinical analysis. I don't think he's aware of the fact that you also do reviews. So
it doesn't matter. Why the ruminations? I've actually thought about that question over the last couple of days since you tossed me at that, because I don't have a severely concrete answer to it. But I think it boils down to the fact that my mentality, my perspective, my emotions when I walk into a rumination is I pretend like there's another person in place where my camera is, and there's someone who's also interested in the work I'm talking about, the Babylon 5 episode, the Voyager episode, the movie I'm looking at, the game I'm looking at, whatever. And I sit down, and in my giant notebook that I showed off earlier, I list all the things that I feel I want to discuss with that person. And so that's basically what a rumination is, me trying to get out everything that I feel is worth talking about. Everything that I feel needs to be either mentioned or discussed or whatever. And obviously I keep saying the word discussed, even though it's just me talking in front of a camera. I do read all my comments, guys, by the way, for anybody curious. But so, you know, I go into it with that mentality of this is more trying to talk out a fictional work and to rather than to like, okay, as you can see in the 3rd and 5th paragraphs of this work, he has been using an excess of punctuation in the 1st and 2nd quarters of each of his sentences, which indicates a differing pace potential as he's trying to indicate a more, blah, blah, blah. I can do that kind of a thing, more analytical stuff, or more of a review, which of course I do actually do my reviews more or less on the side. I just want to sit down and talk about how awesome fiction can be, primarily video games, of course, but that's where I'm going from it. And so that's just kind of why I do that.
I have to say that when I first discovered your channel was back when I was working on, I don't know if it's the Final Fantasy 7 or 8 review. I can't remember which one. But back when I released my very first versions of that, there's like 3 versions of them now. But
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah. Anyways, so this would have been back a few years ago. Can't remember exactly how long. But I saw your Final Fantasy 7 rumination where you had the long hair. You were in I
was still
in the cubicle
in the data center, and
in the cubicle, and I was fascinated by that because that's exactly what it felt like. Like you were just like talking directly with another person about something. And I looked at the total runtime as soon as I opened the video up. I was like, oh, geez. But then I started listening, and that time just flew by. It was like, it felt so genuine, just like a normal conversation with somebody. And it was like, oh, these are all things like, wow, like that's a really cool thought. I hadn't really thought about it that way before.
To be honest, Lorerunner, I think and I don't know how you would take this, but I think you're a little Bob Rossian. You've got this presence that's pretty. It's pretty chill, and it's almost like meditative. I don't know what it is.
Yes,
just listening to you talk about stuff.
I believe
the way you can talk like the other person's really there, like Bob Ross always did.
That is,
That's actually, I think, the reason why I got into that habit of listening to you while I would eat dinner or something. It's almost like an unwinding, like soothing experience to watch the Lorerunner, especially your voice. Your voice is great, similar to because I do the same thing with Bob Ross. Actually, for a long time I would listen to him while I would try to go to sleep. It would help me fall asleep at night.
Yeah.
And so I think what you're doing is awesome. And so
thank you.
Next part of the question, on a more general note for all of you, how difficult is it separating bad localization from a bad story? You got thoughts on that, Landon?
Well, okay.
You know Japanese better than any of us, so
it's It's tough because there's a culture that's arisen around a lot of content that's localized from Japan that has become tolerant of poor localization practices. Because you're just not going to get it otherwise, right? So either you're relying on fan translated manga because the plans to release the manga are, it's not within the next decade that you would ever get to read a real translation otherwise, or a lot of fan subs in anime. On the professional side, sometimes these things are just crazy rushed, where they give one person way too much work to get done or not enough time to get it done. And so I think there's a culture that's normalized a lot of what we get from Japan as just Japanese, right? It's just Japanese and there's only so much you can do. The reality is that true localization is, and people hate this, but true localization is changing oftentimes the context or some of the imagery to
sometimes changing
something,
the whole sentence.
Something analogous. Like if you're going with the strict definition of localization, that's why we're not talking about translation, because you can just translate things and then rely on the person reading that they have some kind of cultural context, that they're familiar with the culture it came from and what have you. And a lot of people are, and so it's okay. And there's a lot of people that demand, they would far rather get as direct a translation as possible. And so sometimes that is what happened, especially if we're talking about a lot of the games we talk about, like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so if you grew up playing a lot of games that were from Japan and that kind of had poor translation / localization, you might have gotten used to some bad habits in video game writing. And so the thing is my rule of thumb personally is, if there's anything that stands out and makes you go, what? Wait, what? Wait, why did they say that way? Or anything that breaks the experience, in my opinion, you should be able to get into a state of flow. You should be able to experience the story and not have something that felt like somebody pumped the brakes on you. And then you get back into it, but somebody pumped the brakes on you again. You're okay. You still got it. It wasn't a smooth ride.
It was just weird.
Yeah. Sometimes there's only so much that can be done. Some things come from just real far reaches of Japanese culture, for example, and they're too high context. Like Japan is 99.8 or 0.9% Japanese.
Right.
Really?
So,
I didn't know that.
I hate to blow everyone's minds here. But, like when I first lived in Japan, I lived in Osaka.
What you mean by that is that it's not a highly... there's not a lot of immigration to
it's not like the States,
Japan.
in other words.
Right.
Yeah, all sorts of people here.
Yeah. A lot of, like Canada, United States, many parts of Europe, and a lot of the rest
South
of the world
America,
has had a lot of immigration. And like where I lived in Osaka originally, there's a part of Osaka, it's like a little Korea town, and there's like 100,000 Koreans or something that live there. But it's funny they call them Koreans, because a lot of them are like third generation, born, raised in Japan, but they still have to carry foreigners' registration cards. Japan is not very tolerant of non-Japanese, and it's not a problem because there's so few of them, and so they'll never be enough of a voting block to change anything about that. What that means, though, is Japanese culture is highly understood in almost the most homogenous way that it possibly could be across most of the population, like 99.9% of the population. There are regional differences and things, but culturally speaking, you can say a lot less and convey a lot more information in Japanese to another Japanese person because of that, right? Where in like, let's take the United States, for example. I don't know, we're here in Utah right now, and there's some things that we may do and say on a daily basis that would sound really unusual to someone from, I don't know, let's say...
What the fetch are you talking about?
Utah is a great
listening.
Yeah. To somebody who maybe is more used to how things go in South Carolina, for example. Like, we have family in Mississippi, and going down there and spending a few weeks, you come back and you almost feel like you've already caught on to an accent or something.
Oh, totally.
There are regional dialects and things in Japan. They have that kind of stuff still, but as a whole, it's not nearly so different culturally, right? You don't have these regions that were traditionally populated by people from one country and then the people from another country. You don't have areas like in New York where you've got boroughs. where you've got the Irish and the Chinese and Italians, and they're just like smashed in together. Like that, just the closest thing to that in Japan. There's a few areas. Toyota is one of them actually, where there's a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Portuguese signs that you'll see in Spanish signs. But again, there's so few in the broad scheme of things that it just doesn't have any impact on Japanese culture itself. That's like a huge tangent just to say that in Japan, they oftentimes will understand a grunt or a nod in a way that would never be understood in the United States, for example. Like you can just get that across in a certain way, and it hit the nail on the head for them. That is super difficult to localize, especially when you're limited with a text box. Like maybe you can't add what you need, or you feel like I need to add one of those liner notes, and say, okay, well, what they're talking about is this festival where normally they would do this, and then, and that's really hard. And I sympathize with the people that want that stuff, because I want that stuff too. I hear things like we're talking about Tabata's interview, and I'm like, just give me the Japanese transcript. What did he
actually say?
What did he really say? And because there's always some, transferring the meaning, not necessarily the literal word for word, which could contain some kind of different subtext. So I feel really bad for people that have this kind of responsibility on their shoulders in a month, 2 months or whatever.
Especially back in the 90s JRPG days when they were trying to translate, like one guy translate a whole game in like a freaking couple weeks or whatever.
Woolsey, dude. He's a
legend.
Yeah, it's a really hard job, and it's what has helped with this in recent years is not just people, not just there being more people who can do the job, but that like Square Enix, for example, they bring people in house now, and they have people as they're developing a game, oftentimes, who are involved in that, localizing a game while it's being worked on. That helps a ton. Sometimes you have to do that because you're going to show some teaser stuff at E3, and like, what is this called? I don't know. You need that ready. But some companies just don't have the budget for that, and so especially for niche genres and really like small, like Nihon Falcom, not that they have poor localization, but they're a company that people will tolerate a little more from them, because they just want the game. They really want the game, and oftentimes they're already so into Japan that they get it, right? Mm-hmm. And so to me, that pump the brakes, right? If you feel that pump the brakes and it broke your flow a little bit, ideally should not happen. I wouldn't say that means localization is bad. If that is happening, I would expect that to still be the case. But playing Final Fantasy 15 and being like, well, Arden said this. Wonder what he said in Japanese. You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't. And we'll probably never be able to get away from that completely. But that's a secondary track, that the Japanese players that's not even entering their mind. Right. Having to wonder doubly if the translator did a good job. So anyways, I would say one good thing that will definitely tell you bad writing is bad plot, because bad plot will come through right. No matter what. If you can tell that someone showed up via plot device, there's tells that have nothing to do with language. So anyways, that's my rambling on that. That's I would say if you're feeling that interrupting in the flow too frequently, and then bad plot stands out like a sore thumb, that's obviously bad writing, right?
I still remember that you totally blew my mind. This is back when I was living at your guys' house in Denver. It's something I hadn't like consciously picked up on, and it's one of the more, I think, obvious of the gestures in Japan that you could tell like what it means. But you're like, when they scratch the back of their head like this, it's because they're embarrassed. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And I was thinking about all the times I had seen characters scratch the back of their head in JRPGs. I was like, they're always embarrassed when they scratch the back of their head.
Is it Cloud, or am I thinking of Squall that does that like all the time?
You're thinking of Cloud. Cloud does that.
Yeah, Cloud does it all the time. He's always scratching the back of his head like that. Yeah. And it was like, holy crap, you're right. Like, I didn't realize, but that adds a layer of context through just a gesture that we don't have, in North America or whatever. We don't do this every time we're embarrassed. But you look at anime or anything Japanese, and people are doing that all the time. They're scratching the back of their head, and it's because they're expressing something that I wouldn't have known about consciously at least, until you had explained that. And so I'm sure that it goes way deeper than that. Like you're saying, even grunts or nods or whatever.
I have a couple books on Japanese body language. Maybe I should do a video or two about this because it is different. Well, like in Japan, traditionally, this is a whole other thing, but traditionally that you don't look somebody in the eyes, or at least too terribly much. The more appropriate place to look at somebody while you're talking to them is more about in their chest area down here. It's a little less direct, a little more comfortable for them. And Americans have this tendency to really look people in the eyes when they talk to them, and it comes across as overbearing to some Japanese who aren't used to that. There's all kinds of crap like that.
That's funny because when they refer to themselves, Americans will point to their chest,
right?
Whereas Japanese will point
to their nose.
Yeah, like right to their face. Like me. Oh, you talking to me? It's like no. But then it's just funny. It's like a flip.
They'll point. I had people show me. I'd ask somebody, "Oh, how do I get to such station or whatever?" And they're showing me on my map because I was long enough ago. Nobody had smartphones, except for the ones they had in Japan, but I didn't have one. And so they use their middle finger to point. It's just hilarious. To sit there. And,
oh, you see it. What I do?
Yeah, that's funny.
Well, that's awesome. Anything else anyone wants to add to that? Because I was
just going to toss out three quick things, pretty much alongside what he was just saying. I've actually followed localization and translation of JRPGs for a really long time, for obvious reasons. And I don't know Japanese, but I know Japanese structure very well, if that makes any sense. Like, if you put some Japanese on the screen, I'm like, I have no idea. But, okay, well, this goes here, and they've got these 15 words to mean this exact thing, and this level of politeness for this, all that stuff. I get that.
Right, yeah.
So I just want to say that with regards to your hitting the brakes thing you were talking about, a fantastic example of this is Final Fantasy VIII, a game that is translated but not localized. That's how I like to refer to that. And I guess you were saying the exact same thing. There's a specific scene, which I'm sure most people remember, where it's, oh, that pathetic married couple, and just in the middle of it. And it's just the most awkward exposition in the world. And you can tell it's like, wait, okay, hang on, what? And I don't know what the English translation would be, but basically it's one of those things that's through intonation you could say, aha, they're together, and therefore that's why I'm suspecting them of this. And that just flows in Japanese. But in English, that just does, oh, hang on. Go all there for a second. Just give me a second. Okay. And it's been such a struggle trying to enjoy games for their story for so many years, because it is my personal opinion that the first Final Fantasy we got that actually had truly good localization was FF9. In 2000, we didn't get a good localized FF until FF9, where they finally did that. And then the only exception prior to that would be Earthbound, which was just a freak of nature in so many different ways. And I'm not going to get into a tangent on that game. You should play it if you haven't. And I know this might be outing myself as a heretic here, but I personally have always believed that for localizing something, you have to interpret. You cannot. I mean, obviously, you're trying to understand intent. Yes. But my point is, doing a literal translation, doing a literal one-to-one of the original thing isn't going to work in other cultures and in other languages. And this has been proven many, 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 many times. So I think you have to try and look at the intent of what it was doing. Like, is this a joke? Is this something that's trying to convey some deep gravity or emotion, or these characters are connected, or maybe there's something else going on there? How do I convey that in this language? And so, again, I go back to Earthbound. There are quite a few bits in Earthbound which are completely different in English that convey the exact same message as the original Japanese.
Earthbound's such a sarcastic, like, the humor of Earthbound is not what you would typically find in a Japanese game. And it's just so out there, and it's so funny, and it seems, I related to the writing of that game very, very well. The way I do not normally for Japanese games. And so, yeah, that was different. For its time, was that 95? Like, for the time Earthbound came out? Like, that was not common.
And yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe it was before that. But.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I love the localization of Final Fantasy 12 and of Vagrant Story. I mean, it's just so phenomenal. And I watched interviews and have read other interviews with Alexander O. Smith, who was on for both of those, but also Joseph Reeder, who was on Final Fantasy 12. And they talk about that specifically. It's like, you can't just say exactly what they said. You have to take intent, message, meaning, and then ask, would this character who we're patterning after a British person from this place, would they say it like that? You know what I mean? Like, how would they say this if a person from this region with this accent, how would they say that?
You know what?
What
That's
would
a
the
great
character
point.
say?
I never once
Yeah.
thought in Final Fantasy 12. I wonder what the Japanese was.
Yeah, never.
Not one time, but in Final Fantasy
Never.
7, I thought that like half the time.
What you trying to say
I think
here?
I
Hang
know
on,
what
hang
they
on.
said.
Yeah,
Google.
That's funny. I didn't even
It's-
realize, but that's the mark of good localization is that you
And,
don't
you know,
realize.
there are people who aren't going to be fans of like the I don't know, I guess the antiquity of the language in, say, Vagrant Story specifically, or something like that. It's like it's very King Jamesy. I am way into that. I love that language. That language is fascinating to me. It feels very powerful and weighty to me, and I'm just into that. So that's a personal thing. But on top of it, it's just exactly what you're saying. At no point in any translation from Alexander Smith or Alexander O. Smith that I've ever played have I wondered what the Japanese says. It's always just been the silkiest, smoothest experience, like butter, just like beautiful, just like lather me in it. I'm digging it. This is awesome. I love their work, and so, yeah, I agree. Like, a good localization is all about understanding the meaning and intent, which is, as Landon is saying, understanding the culture, and then saying, how do we take that meaning, and then in this culture, what's a similar meaning, and then we say it in that way instead.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's hard to do.
Like I said, like let's say these games were coming from some country in I don't know, the Middle East. That, let's say these are all coming from Yemen or something. I was like, you would be relying on people understanding the culture of that country, and most people wouldn't, and it just wouldn't work, right? A lot of people understand Japanese culture or get into it, and so there's a crutch that some people lean on there. But one thing I was going to mention was there was an interview that I listened to recently with someone who does localization, and they were talking about how when they're hiring a new person, quite often they'll ask them if they've done any fan stories or what's the word I'm looking for?
Fanfics?
Fanfics, yeah. And they'll ask to read them. And because what they want first and foremost is somebody who can write, who's a writer and creative. And that's and you might, people get derided for writing fan fiction, right? It's just like, we're wasting your time. But no, you're not if you want to do this sort of thing. If you're interested in writing at all, writing fan fiction is going to be great practice for you.
Yeah.
But it's going to show them, like, I can take an existing universe, I can adapt to that universe, I can adopt the language of that universe and sound believable and natural and
That's
entertaining and all those sorts of things. So I was surprised to hear. So if there's anyone out there who's wanting to get into localization, writing fan fiction is honestly a great place to kind of build up some skills, because you're a writer. Like you're literally starting from scratch in a lot of ways.
That's actually a really good point. It's actually something that Heon brought up in our discussion that we did together back before my 12 review came out, when we were talking about localization and stuff like that. He was talking about how important it is to just first and foremost be a good writer before you even attempt to dig into localization or translation, because like we're saying, like, it's really important that you're able to take intent and meaning, but then rewrite that line in a way that sounds really, really good. And so being a good writer is very important, I think, in being a good translator and being part of a good localization team, for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
So in that
guys?
sense, given like the original question, how difficult is it to separate bad localization from bad story? If it's bad, like if what you're seeing is bad and you don't know if it's story or localization, it's both. Like they screwed
Probably.
up. Yeah. Like whether it was the writing within the localization process or whether it was the translating within the localization process, it was still that process that, like, well, I guess it still could go back to the writers of the original work, right? I don't know. I get
Bad
what
plot.
you're
Like we were saying, bad plot is bad plot. You can see through that either way.
Yeah.
But a lot of times there's a really good story. Final Fantasy VII enthralled me. I cannot explain what my experience was the first time I played that game, how just intently moved I was, like blown away actually by that story. And the localization is freaking garbage. So
in some ways that's like the mark of a really good story, is if like in spite of the bad localization, it still spoke to you in a way that other games hadn't.
Yeah.
Like on Twitter, people have been tweeting out, this is kind of funny. People have been tweeting out this like short sequence of when Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight very first sees like the Joker.
Joker, yeah.
And he doesn't know who the Joker is and Joker's wearing a little surgical mask, but it's obvious who
it's the Joker.
And then but he's dressed as a woman, so it's a little weird. But then he takes off the mask, and then Harvey Dent's like, oh, and now he recognizes him. But it's like, people are kind of ripping on how dumb that scene is because he should have known. But the funny thing is that I watched that movie 10 times, maybe. I never
never even thought about it. Yep.
In the sequence of the film, it works. Like, sure, if you just take that one scene out of context and just watch it, and this is stupid.
You're like, this is the ugliest nurse I've ever seen.
Are you licensed, sir?
But in the flow, you just don't care. Like, and that's the mark of a good story and of a good storyteller, honestly. And in the case of Final Fantasy VII, where it's just like, okay, things are translated so weird half the time, but you just don't notice or don't care because what you're experiencing is so awesome and different, and it's a good story.
Sure. Yeah. Well, okay, we've reached the end of our topics. That was a great podcast, guys. That was a lot of fun.
It's my favorite one.
Thank you, Lorerunner, for coming on. Appreciate it. Where can
for having me? I mean, I didn't actually expect this, and all of a sudden, I have Roxamus being like, "Hey, so these guys might be like," and I'm like, "What? Really? Me?
Yes, you. Yes, you.
Okay,
we love your stuff. Been watching for a long time." Guys, if you haven't seen his channel, go check it out, The Lorerunner, both on Twitch and on YouTube.
It's easy to find me just with lorerunner.com. I've got everything linked on there.
Oh, yeah, your website, too. Yeah, good point. He just recently did an entire lore run of the entire Final Fantasy series. Holy crap.
Yeah.
That's all on Twitch, right? That's logged. Is that going to be there forever, or is that going to disappear at some point?
That's almost already all gone from Twitch at this point, because Twitch only keeps my stuff for 2 weeks. However, I have been slowly uploading this to my Twitch archive channel.
Oh, the archive channel.
On my second YouTube channel. So I actually just uploaded the first FF9 video on that today.
Okay.
So go check that out, and hopefully not hate it horribly. Each video is like 8 hours long.
Well, you're playing through the whole game, right?
Yeah, I'm going through the whole game and talking about it the entire time. It was a little I had to buy this brand new tea to help my throat get through that entire lore run.
Oh, geez. Oh, real quick question. When you're playing through those, you're just focusing on the lore side of it, right? So do you apply like cheats or some way to get through certain gameplay sections quickly so you can get more to lore, or how does that work?
I don't actually like cheating in games that I enjoy, to be completely honest about it, but I have learned to basically swallow my pride on that, because the harsh reality is that the run will take longer of what I call dead air. It's like, all right, I've hit a point where I no longer have anything to talk about, and I still need to get, this material leveled, or this magicite put up, or I need this many spells drawn, or whatever. And so I do make it a point to cheat on any given lore run that I'm going through at this point in time, unless it's a game where cheats don't really apply. Like, theoretical example, if I was doing a lore run on Mega Man, I don't need cheats on Mega Man because it's Mega Man.
Sure. Right.
But yes, I do what I call mega cheating throughout the entire series of the Final Fantasy stuff. But I do still try to sit and talk about the gameplay, because I have played these games legit before, so I can still get across concepts and get, like I was saying right at the beginning of the thing, gameplay is still really important, and these games still need to be fun to play, not just fun to watch.
Well, I'm just like, how do you get through Final Fantasy 12 in any reasonable time, to do a lore run without like just those long stretches of just fighting forever,
It's funny you say that, FF12, so I also have to admit I'm a bit of a speedrunner on the side. I'm not really a good one. But I have been a speedrunner for many, many, many years, and I follow a lot of the tactics and techniques. And you learn some interesting things about games when you start trying to figure out how to beat them as quickly as possible. For example, in FF12, did you know that there's something along the lines of 72 required encounters in the entire game?
Really? Only 72?
Because you can hold down R2
and just run,
just kind of ignore things.
Yeah, that's true.
The vast majority of the game. There are very, very, very few forced encounters. In fact, there's even some encounters that you'd think are forced and are not.
Isn't the game also designed to be beaten at level 1 as well? Because you could always do the mode where you don't level up or whatever.
Yes, there's the hard mode, and you can beat the game at level 1. I don't recommend that for a first-time player, but you can totally do that. And so, and that's also, if I may just really quick aside, that's always the hallmark of a really well-designed game, in my opinion. If you can beat it low, Chrono Trigger is a fantastic example of this. I actually did a level 1 playthrough of Chrono Trigger. It's also on my channel. That helps. You can see how well designed a game is when you're allowed allowed to do that, when it's possible to do that. And FF12
Sure.
is also like that.
Nice.
Kingdom Hearts is another good example of a game that you can basically beat at level 1.
Sweet. Yeah, so go check out his channels. I'm definitely going to get onto the archive channel because I want to watch the entire Final Fantasy lore run for sure. That'll be my new dinner watching experience for the next several weeks or whatever. But anyways, thanks for being on. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you again next week with new videos and a new podcast. Until then, have a great week and peace out.
Peace.
Yeah.